My family owns homes in both Mexico and Texas, so I'm constantly crossing the border. On a typical week, I alternate between the US and Mexico with ease. Just today, I crossed over from Mexico into Texas to head to school, and after, I'll make my way back south. I spend most of my time in Mexico, and over the years, I've grown somewhat accustomed to the cartel presence. It's become normal for me to call off nights out with friends due to cartel-related violence, shootings, confrontations, stuff like that. It's just part of life now. But what happened recently changed everything. I came face to face with the cartel. It wasn't just a distant presence anymore. My ex-girlfriend lived in Mexico, in a gated neighborhood on the wealthier side of the city. Naturally, I used to visit her a lot when we were together. One night, her parents were out of town, leaving her and her younger brother alone until the next day. So, she invited me over, and we drank. A lot. Around 2 a.m., we decided to go for a walk to smoke some weed. Weed I had brought from Texas. We ended up sitting on the bleachers of a basketball court, right behind a gorgeous house with expensive cars parked outside. I asked her, "What do they do for a living?" She casually replied, "Cartel." I thought she was joking, but then she told me how, back in 2014, the Mexican army had actually put her whole neighborhood on lockdown because of them. My smile quickly faded. A mix of anger and concern hit me, and I asked her, "What the hell are we doing behind a cartel safe house at 2 a.m. smoking foreign weed?" It all happened so fast. Just 5 minutes later, a tall white pickup truck pulled up in front of the court. I knew instantly something was off. I kept telling her, "We need to leave now." But she just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just some kids making out in the truck. That seemed reasonable at first, but my gut told me otherwise. The truck didn't turn off its engine, and after sitting there for what felt like an eternity, I knew we had to go. The moment we stood up to leave, the truck sped off, but not in the direction we were hoping. As we made our way to the other street, the weight that had lifted from my shoulders came crashing back down, twice as heavy. The truck had intercepted us at the corner. She bolted for a house under construction, pulling me along with her, but I froze. You learn a lot from having a cop for a dad. One thing that always stuck with me is, never run if you have nothing to hide. I didn't have the weed, she did. So I stood there, trying to calm my racing heart. And then, the driver's side window rolled down. 2 men, both armed. My stomach dropped. The passenger looked completely out of his mind. I mean, genuinely unhinged. His pupils were so dilated it was clear he was high on something, tripping beyond belief. The driver, though, he looked like a pretty normal guy. So normal, in fact, it was almost comforting. His calmness stood in sharp contrast to the chaos unfolding. The conversation was all in Spanish, of course. The driver asked what we were doing out there, and I simply replied, "Smoking." He asked, "Smoking what?" I told him, "Normal cigarettes." He glanced at his partner, then back at me, the silence stretching out between us. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and it hit me. This wasn't just a casual encounter. I broke the silence by saying, "I don't know who you're looking for, but it's definitely not us. I'm not even from here." He then asked if I was American, to which I nodded. Without missing a beat, he said, "Show me." Luckily, I always carry my passport with me since I cross the border so often. I handed it over, and he started asking about my girlfriend. I told him she was American too, which wasn't entirely true. But he didn't press. Then he told me to go get her. I hesitated. "I'd rather not," I said. "If they find weed on her, that's not theirs. She's screwed." Surprisingly, he didn't push it further. Instead, he took a look through my phone. After what felt like an eternity, he finally said he didn't want to see us out this late, especially not behind that house. As the truck drove off, I turned around to find her peeking from behind a pile of cement bags. I signaled for her to follow, and we sprinted back to the house. But as soon as we reached her front yard, a wave of dread hit me. I needed to get rid of the weed. I asked her to give it to me, and she told me she'd hidden it under the floorboards. We couldn't leave it there. If those men found it, we were done. The 2 minutes it took us to run back to the house were easily the most terrifying moments of my life. What still haunts me to this day is the look on the other guy's face, the passenger. The man didn't speak a word, but his eyes were locked on me the whole time, his hand resting dangerously close to the grip of his rifle. It felt like he was waiting for me to say something wrong. One wrong move, and he'd blow my brains out without hesitation. 5 years ago, when I was 15, something strange began to happen. My great-aunt, who had always been a bit of a hoarder, had her health rapidly decline, and she could no longer care for herself. So after much discussion, my family made the difficult decision to move her into a nursing home. It wasn't easy, but it seemed to be the best option given her condition. I don't want to throw my family under the bus, but this part is crucial to understanding what happened next. Her house, now abandoned, stood eerily silent, with only my father and me stopping by occasionally to check on it. At first, the changes seemed insignificant. Just a few minor things moved around, drawers left open, small signs that something wasn't quite right. But we didn't think much of it at first. Another person, someone close to my great-aunt, had a key to the house, and we assumed maybe he was just retrieving some of his belongings. It made sense at the time, but as the weeks passed, things started to escalate. We began visiting the house more often, mostly to retrieve things of value and simply to check on it. And that's when it all started to feel off. I remember one evening as we roamed the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't a fleeting thought. No, it was something tangible, like eyes on the back of my neck. And that feeling only grew stronger as time went on. More things were displaced, things that seemed to have a mind of their own. Stuffed animals that had once sat neatly on a shelf were now perfectly aligned step by step on the staircase. Dirty footprints appeared out of nowhere, leading to drawers that had been torn open, their contents spilled across the floor. The unease started to settle in, and we knew something wasn't right. Our suspicion grew, and we began taking late-night drives past the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone, a flash of a light, a shadow moving inside, anything. We needed to know who or what was haunting that place. I started telling my friends about the strange happenings, and being the curious and maybe foolish teenagers we were, we decided to turn this into an adventure. What better way to solve the mystery than to spend the night there ourselves? It sounded like the perfect opportunity to catch the person, or whatever it was, that seemed to be haunting the house. Another crucial detail: there was no way in or out of the house. All the windows were shut tight, and every door was locked. Only my family and this other guy had a key, so it wasn't like someone could just slip in unnoticed. But let's rewind to the day we decided to stay there. I brought 3 of my friends with me, and we all settled in the kitchen, not noticing anything strange. At least not yet. Everything seemed the same as it had been during our previous visits. The usual disarray and oddities, nothing out of the ordinary. For a while, we assumed that whoever had been causing the disturbances wasn't around. We ordered pizza, joked around, and just waited. It was as if we were sitting there, expecting something to happen. Finally, we decided to take a break and go for a walk with my 2 dogs. I made sure to lock the door behind me. There was no way we wanted anyone sneaking in while we were gone. But when we returned, something was different. The first thing I noticed was the lamp. The one in the far corner of the living room. It was on. Now let me paint the picture. The living room was a mess, completely cluttered with junk. The lamp was on the far side, practically buried in the trash. Whoever turned it on had to have climbed over piles of stuff to do so. It was impossible to ignore. That's when it hit us. The person we had been waiting for was in the house now. We moved into the kitchen to keep a low profile, hoping to see what would happen next. After a few tense minutes, one of my friends, let's call her Jane, chickened out and decided to leave. We weren't going to stop her, so we let her go. But just 5 minutes after Jane shut the front door behind her, we heard something that made our blood run cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably coming from the wooden stairs above us. It was clear someone thought we had all left. We froze, listening closely to the creaks of the steps. But then something else happened. One of my dogs barked, and suddenly, the footsteps stopped. There was only one wall between us and whoever was coming down those stairs, and when the realization hit, we all froze in terror. We didn't need to see them. Just the sound of the footsteps was enough to make our blood run cold. Without thinking, we bolted out of the house as fast as we could. Fortunately, there was a door separating the staircase from the hallway, and we had the presence of mind to lock it when we returned from our walk. So, in all likelihood, we just trapped whoever it was upstairs. Once we were outside, we didn't know what to do. Our hearts were still racing, our minds reeling. The only thing that made sense was to call the police and let them handle it. As we waited, basically holding our breath, in shock from everything that had just happened, something else shattered the silence. A male voice, low and quiet, as though talking on the phone. We all turned to the house, and that's when we saw it, a window slightly ajar on the second story. He must have opened it while we were out, and that's when we knew something was really wrong, because like I mentioned, no windows had ever been opened. We couldn't make out exactly what he was saying, but we heard one chilling phrase: "Been caught." 30 long minutes later, the police arrived and went inside, combing through the entire house. They looked everywhere, but the place was empty. He had plenty of time to hide, and he must have known the cops were coming. But the real shock came when we finally learned the extent of what had happened. There was a room in the house completely filled with cardboard boxes, stacked high up to the ceiling. It looked like he'd been hiding in there, playing some twisted game with us. It only got worse from there. He left notes, strange cryptic notes scattered all over the house. They had weird, drawn, smiley faces, flowers, and phrases like "catch me" scrawled on them. He even went as far as to rig the front door with some kind of alarm, so he'd know whenever someone entered. But it didn't stop there. He trashed the bedroom beyond recognition, destroying furniture, throwing things everywhere. And to make it even more disturbing, he left a bizarre message in the bathroom. He had defecated in the toilet and placed a flower on top of it. Despite everything, he never got caught. Not once. Our checkups grew more frequent, shifting from once a day to every hour. But each time we visited, there was nothing. No signs of him, no clues, nothing to suggest he'd even been there. Eventually, we decided to let things cool off and stopped checking in on the house as much. After all, surely he couldn't keep living in a place that was practically uninhabitable, drowning in cat pee and piles of trash. He'd have to leave eventually, right? Wrong. About 4 months later, after we'd stopped paying much attention to the house, one of my friends spotted something that made our hearts drop. Figures, silhouettes, standing behind the curtains, just staring out the window. It was as if they were watching us. We all stared in disbelief, and in that moment, we knew we couldn't ignore it any longer. The eerie silence of the past few months shattered in an instant. Just like that, our curiosity was reignited, and we all felt the same dread. One day, we decided to show up at the house again, ready or not. There were 7 of us, and we were determined to search that house from top to bottom. We needed to find where this guy was hiding, how he was coming and going without being seen. But, as always, everything was locked. The house was eerily still, and when we first stepped inside, the kitchen was filled with the stench of rotten food. But the real surprise waited for us in the living room. We decided to split up to cover more ground. 4 of us stayed in the living area, while one friend waited outside. Carl and I made our way to the stable section of the house. There was a hole in the wall leading from the hay area into the attic, but we'd never been able to pinpoint exactly where it went. Carl began throwing little stones at the hole, hoping the sound would echo, guiding us to the entrance. Then, suddenly, the cardboard covering the hole bent as if someone on the other side had knocked back. I yelled down to my friend outside, asking if they had finally found the entrance. Her voice came back, shaken. "No, everyone's downstairs." Carl and I exchanged a look of confusion, before we rushed out of the stable and up to the others. We figured if we went to the attic now, we'd catch him. There would be no way he could escape that quickly. He'd have to pass us on the stairs. We all sprinted upstairs, but when we got there, nothing. Empty. Completely silent. It felt like the whole house had swallowed him whole. At that point, we were done. We decided to leave it alone, not return, and put an end to the madness. It started to sink in that we might have been lucky. He'd never actually hurt us, just terrified us, messing with our heads. But the thought lingered. What would have happened if we had actually caught him? What would he have done if we confronted him face to face? Our parents were, understandably, not thrilled with what we were doing. So, after that last encounter, we dropped the whole thing. Months passed without any further incidents. Every now and then, we'd drive by and see a faint light flickering inside, but nothing ever came of it. Eventually, the house was put back on the market, and we thought that was the end of it. Today, the house has been completely emptied out and is undergoing renovations. It's a strange feeling, knowing that place is being rebuilt as if nothing ever happened. But for us, it'll always be a reminder of that twisted game and the strange figure who haunted it. Subscribe to my channel for more horror videos, and don't forget to press the bell icon.